thanks everyone for coming today. So I'd like to start by asking a question. How many people here have heard of the term crossing the chasm? All right. So this is a popular term when we talk about the sorry, not the API, but the technology adoption lifecycle, typically with like consumer goods. And there's this boundary or this barrier that companies encounter when they're trying to reach a mass audience. And I've been thinking a lot about APIs and how companies can generate ROI from that. And I know we tend to measure things like active developers or the number of signups or maybe even time to first API call. But as I thought about this, what I think really is the measure of achieving ROI is actually getting integrations into production. And so I think there's an API adoption chasm out there that shows up as gaps inside of our developer experience. And what happens in these gaps is a lot of work gets shifted onto the developer. And this can result in those integrations dragging on for months and perhaps even derailing an integration or preventing it from even getting off the ground. So to identify those gaps and this chasm in API adoption, I'm going to break down the developer journey into 4 stages today and talk about what we tend to present as far as the developer experience and where those gaps might exist. By the way, I'm Sidney Maestre, and I am the VP of Developer Relations at APIMatic. I've worked on API programs at companies like PayPal, Xero, and Lob in the past. So the first stage of the developer journey, I believe, is the discovery stage. And at this point, a developer is asking themselves questions like, what can I do with this API? Will it solve my problem? How much work is this going to be? And at this stage, we tend to focus on things like a really well-written API reference guide. Maybe we have some cURL commands sprinkled in there. And we definitely have some kind of authentication narrative. Without it, how are they ever going to connect and make any API calls? At stage 2, the developer is in evaluation stage. They are asking even more questions, but specifically, did the things I learned during discovery, are they actually true? And to prove that to themselves, they often want to get hands-on with code. So they might want to find a getting started guide to lead them to that first API call. Of course, they need their API keys, so I hope that's part of that process. Maybe you give them a Postman collection so they can interact with the API without writing code. Or you may go all the way to generating some generic code samples so they can create a quick and dirty proof of concept to just validate their assumptions about your API. But it's between stages 2 and 3 where I think that chasm exists and where developers are really challenged. They, and this isn't to lay any blame on anyone. This is to simply point out that I think we tend to focus really heavily on stages 1 and 2 as companies building API programs. And that makes a lot of sense, right? If you aren't getting stage 1 and 2 right, chances are developers aren't really getting to stage 3. But often, I think API programs can kind of stall out after stage 2 and just go, hey, it's good enough. We've got it. We've got everything the developer needs. And what often happens at stage 2 is you see this drop off in traffic, right? API traffic is going during the proof of concept, and then it drops off. And it doesn't come back for a while because those developers are actually building that integration. And I think that the bridge between stage 2 and 3, from my experience, is really SDKs. And I think that's part of what's going to help those developers and the things that you can build around SDKs as part of your developer experience. But don't take my word for it. Stripe actually has this written inside of their documentation that their reason for providing SDKs is to reduce the boilerplate code that developers have to write. And I think this really supports that idea that where the gaps are, we are shifting a lot of work onto developers, that they have to do all the code themselves. So at stage 3, this is where developers are asking questions like, I need to solve my business objectives. How do I do that with these APIs? Or how can I get my team to increase velocity and deliver this faster? But I think the biggest question you're asking yourself during the integration stage is, what do I need to do to deliver a great experience for my customers? And that's where you need to create something that's resilient, that's well-tested, that's going to handle errors gracefully for your customer, delivers a great experience. And that is not a quick and dirty proof of concept. That requires a whole lot more code that they're going to have to write themselves. But if you go the extra mile and you offer SDKs to your developers, along with a library, some kind of code library, reference guides, you can start to leverage that in other parts of your developer experience. Instead of having cURL commands in your Getting Started guide, you can actually have Getting Started guides incorporate code samples in different languages that are built on top of your SDK libraries. You can have copy-paste runnable code examples inside of each endpoint that actually shows off your SDK. And if you want to go the extra mile, then perhaps something like tutorials or a guided walkthrough can be really powerful, because you can actually show them how to chain together a series of API calls to solve those business objectives. And the hot topic everyone has been talking about, which is AI assistance. So I think the concern about AI is that it's going to bring back some kind of random code to your developer. But if you actually take your AI and you train it on code that's been generated, that's deterministically written, you're going to give them back code that is of high quality and that you believe is going to be reliable and deliver that great integration for their customers. So that's definitely something that you want to explore. Now, we did a case study with Visa, and we asked them how long their integration times were taking, and they said it was taking about 12 months for their partners to integrate before they had SDKs. After they introduced those, it actually brought that integration time down to about 3 months, with the side benefit that the number of support tickets they were seeing dropped nearly in half. And that's because they just had to do a lot less hand-holding for the developers who were trying to integrate. So at stage 4, well, why do we need stage 4, right? They finished integrating in stage 3. We don't have to worry anymore, right? The reality is your APIs are going to change, languages are going to change, security vulnerabilities will be exposed. So the developer has to continue to maintain this integration for the long term. And if they wrote all the code in the beginning, they have to maintain all of that code as well. So through SDKs, you can actually deliver updates directly to those developers through popular package managers. And now you're saying, whoa, hold on, Sid. Like, now I'm taking on all the responsibility for maintaining this. And that's where I think a lot of OpenAPI tools are providing the people in this room the necessary tools and workflows so that they can actually keep their SDKs up to date as they're making improvements and changes to their APIs. Now, let me see. So we've got a lot of companies out there that offer SDKs, well-respected brands, and we look up to these companies. And we actually did a survey of 100 API companies that offer SDKs, and we tracked all the different industries and they're in. And it's a wide range of industries. So SDKs appear to be useful for developers, desirable for them in lots of different industries. Why isn't everyone doing this? Well, building and maintaining SDKs is really hard. And I know this from experience because I've done it at companies where I tried to handcraft them with a couple people on my team. That we could never get the SDKs, keep them in sync and up to date with our APIs. We then decided to go the open source code generation route, and we were able to make some headway there, but again, it took a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of expertise that we didn't necessarily have in-house. So it was always a challenge to get the tool to generate that high-quality SDK along with documentation, code samples, and everything we needed. The good news is that was 5 years ago, and now we have a lot of tools that are out there that are commercial tools like APIMatic, but there's other companies out there doing it now, so that you actually have a lot of choice and a lot of opportunity to evaluate tools that can deliver those high-quality SDKs without having to hire a huge team of engineers with all these different expertise in 6 different languages. But before you run off and start testing all these tools, I do want to give you a tip. We've seen thousands and thousands of API specs come through APIMatic, and I was surprised to learn that 20% of these API definitions are not valid, that they actually don't conform to OpenAPI specifications. But of those that are valid, 50% don't produce high-quality code because they haven't been optimized for that use case. We tend to use our API definitions to generate docs. Docs don't need to be compiled, so it's not a problem until you get into the world of code generation. But don't worry, we released a tool last year. It's free to download. It's a VS Code extension. That QR code will take you to it. This has over 1,200 rules that are specifically designed to optimize for code generation. And we even have a cool feature that will auto-fix 5 of the most common errors that we see in API definitions. We can generate a full audit report as like a PDF, if you like, or different formats, and then you and your team can sit down and look through and prioritize how you want to address all these errors that you're finding. And we also have a full stack trace inside of the VS Code extension panel, which you'd be surprised how hard it is to track down the references to find where the root cause is for an issue in your API spec, especially when they're 20,000 lines long YAML file. So I hope everyone got a chance to grab that. But I like to do a little show and tell because I've been doing a lot of talking about developer experience and what it looks like. And so for this talk, I went and I looked for an example of someone who's doing stages 1 and 2 really well. And I found Spotify. So I just want to give you a quick tour and point out some of those things I mentioned. So here's their overview page. I click on Getting Started. It tells me where to go get my API keys, which is great. I need to create an app. Oh, here are my curl commands. Awesome. Tells me how to get my access token. I'm going to request some artist data. OK, cool. There's my curl command. This is an example of what it looks like. And congratulations, I've made my first API call. They've got under tutorials, it seems like their tutorials are very authentication-centric. Again, really important to do that for your developers. And then if I go into single endpoint, like get my current user profile, again, we get the popular 3-column layout with information about the endpoint in the center, and on the right, a wonderful curl example with some other tools we can use, a response sample, and I'm logged in, so if I hit try, cool, it comes back with my name right there. You can see Sid. So that really, like, hello world, time to first API call, I'm there. But I'm a Java developer. So now I'm kind of stuck because now I need to actually look at this and figure out how to translate all of this HTTP REST documentation and curl examples. I need to figure out how to translate that into Java code. But what if we could just go and grab our API definition and import that into one of those new modern SDK generators and see what we can do in a few minutes. I've got less than 6 minutes here, so let's see what we can do with that. So the first thing you'll see these tools do is they'll do some kind of validation. This is light validation. This is just enough validation to get you to generate something successfully. So it'll tell you if it's just going to error out and it won't generate code correctly. But typically, you still want to use that VS Code extension to really polish it. Now, I've got it imported. I want to generate something. I could generate an SDK, but why not just generate a full developer portal that includes the SDKs, the code samples, the getting started guide, and maybe a little API interactive playground, kind of like a Postman collection, kind of like we saw with what Spotify has today. So here I am. I come in here. I click an endpoint. I get my cURL reference here. I get my authentication. Tells me where I can put my API client ID and secret for OAuth 2. But it also generates a whole step-by-step guide. And if I click on any of these languages, it actually updates the whole portal to that language. And I do want to mention something that when developers are in that discovery evaluation stage, something they might be using to evaluate your API is, do you offer some code libraries or SDKs in my language? Maybe that might be the deciding factor between multiple APIs that they're evaluating to do the same thing. So here I come in to Java, and I can see I've got screenshots for Eclipse. And if I go down to the bottom, it's giving me a full, complete example to use this, to do the authentication using Spring, a popular Java framework. If I come over here to another language like Python, and I click on that, apologize, it does load slowly the very first time. And I click in here into installation, I can see it's giving me PyCharm. So it's giving me something that I recognize, I'm familiar with as a developer. And if I go back to Java, loads much faster. But let's go into one of those endpoints. Let's go down to users and get current user profile. So on the right, instead of curl, I'm seeing some Java code that's going to leverage my SDK. I can go and get the SDK itself. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, if I did want a Postman collection, I can get, my users can grab a Postman collection, or if they like Insomnia, they can grab one of those as well, as lots of other formats you can export as. But on the code sample on the right here, I've got just the bare bones, just enough to understand it. Which has always bothered me about code samples is that it leaves things out, right? But if I come in here and I say show complete file, it actually gives me a full example here with all my authentication and my import statements, which I love. But I want to try this out. Now, because I don't actually work for Spotify, I can't fully integrate this with their API gateway, so I'm going to have to do a little copy and paste here. But let's just humor me while I do that. And everyone close your eyes. You can't see my client ID and secret. I'll paste that there. And let me grab the callback right there. And I'll pop that in. And I need some scopes. So I'm working with users. So I guess I'm going to want to maybe read a library. And maybe I want to read private. OK. So before I even go to my IDE, let's go ahead and generate a token and see if that works. OK? You saw a little window pop up there. That was the OAuth 2 dance that just happened. And I can see I've got a valid access token here. But to confirm, I'm going to go ahead and try it out. And sure enough, there's Sid. My name was found. Let's go back to the code sample. And let's actually just grab that full code sample. I'll go over to Eclipse. And I'm going to just paste that in there. Scroll up to the top. I don't want that. Don't need two packages. I'll save it. Oops. Oh, it's not program. Sorry about that. It's app. Cool. No errors. Let's go ahead and let's run this. And it dumps out the full Java object that it gets back. But I hate showing code during a business driven sort of track, but I do want to show you, this is really the power of SDKs, I think. You just come in here and go, get followers dot get total. I didn't have to look at any documentation to learn that. And if I run my code again, I got 3 followers. So I'm very popular on Spotify. So I have to wrap up. I can't show you anymore, but APIMatic actually does have a way to generate those guided walkthroughs, so you can chain together multiple API calls and give those tutorials to developers. So when your API changes, you just update your spec, and it can regenerate all of these artifacts for you. And we're also working with some AI to train it on the code samples and SDKs that we generate. So it's a really exciting time, I think, for API adoption and API consumption. And I think that SDKs can really be that bridge across the chasm to help us recognize the ROI for our customers and for ourselves. And with that, I'll say thanks for coming today.